The auditorium erupted in cheers as I stepped down from the podium, my valedictorian speech still echoing in my ears. 22 years old, summa cum laude, and finally free from the weight of undergraduate expectations. The burgundy cap felt heavy in my hands as I searched the sea of faces for the two people who mattered most, even though I wasn't sure they felt the same about me. There they were, halfway up the bleachers. My mother, Marissa, with her familiar nervous smile and hands clasped tightly in her lap. Beside her sat Ron, my stepfather, arms crossed, face blank as stone. Even from this distance, I could feel his disapproval radiating like heat from asphalt. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I had dreamed of this moment for years, not just the graduation itself, but the hope that maybe, finally, I would see something resembling pride in Ron's eyes. That maybe today would be the day he'd call me son. The crowd began to disperse, families embracing their graduates with tears and laughter. I weaved through the chaos, my heart hammering against my ribs. A few classmates congratulated me as I passed, but their voices felt distant, muffled by the singular focus of reaching my family. "Mom," I called out as I approached. Marissa stood and pulled me into a quick, tight hug. Her eyes were misty, and for a moment, I felt that familiar warmth I remembered from childhood. "We're so proud of you, baby," she whispered against my ear. "Your speech was beautiful." I pulled back, looking past her to Ron, who remained seated, scrolling through his phone. "Ron," I said, extending my hand, "thank you for coming." He glanced up, his pale blue eyes meeting mine for just a second, before looking away. Around us, other families were taking photos, laughing, celebrating. The Johnsons from my dorm were already planning dinner. The Martinez family had brought a homemade banner. "So," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "what did you think of the ceremony?" Ron stood slowly, pocketing his phone. "It was long," he said flatly. The words hit like a slap. I felt my smile falter, but I pressed on. "The scholarship committee wants to nominate me for the graduate program, full funding. I thought maybe we could—" "Landon!" Ron's voice cut through mine like a blade. The way he said my name, clinical, distant, made my stomach drop. A few nearby families had turned to watch, sensing the tension. "I want you to understand something," he continued, his voice growing louder. "You may have graduated top of your class. You may think you're special, but you need to know the truth." "Ron," my mother whispered, a warning in her voice. But he wasn't finished. His jaw tightened, and I saw something ugly flash in his eyes. 20 years of resentment finally finding its voice. "You'll never be my son." The words hung in the air like smoke. Around us, conversations died. Someone's phone was recording. A child asked their parent what the man had said. My mother's face went white. I stood there, diploma heavy in my hands, feeling like that 7-year-old boy again who couldn't understand why nothing I did was ever enough. But this time I didn't cry. This time I simply nodded. "I know," I said quietly. "I've always known." Then I turned and walked away, leaving behind the last shred of hope I'd carried for 20 years. The memory came flooding back as I sat alone in my Atlanta apartment that night, still wearing my graduation clothes. I was 7 years old again, standing in our small kitchen in Asheville, North Carolina, watching my mother make pancakes on a Sunday morning. "Daddy, can I help flip 'em?" I had asked, reaching up on my tiptoes to see the golden batter bubbling in the pan. Ron, who was reading the newspaper at the kitchen table, didn't look up. "Don't call me that," he said flatly. I remember the confusion that washed over me. All my friends called their fathers Daddy, even Jimmy Patterson, whose stepdad had married his mom just like Ron had married mine. "What should I call you then?" I asked, my 7-year-old voice small and uncertain. "Ron," he replied, still not lifting his eyes from the sports section. "My name is Ron." My mother's shoulders tensed as she flipped the pancakes with more force than necessary. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, broken only by the sizzle of butter in the hot pan. "But you're married to Mommy," I persisted. The way children do when they sense something is wrong but can't quite grasp what it is. That makes you my daddy, right? Finally, Ron looked at me. His pale eyes were cold, distant, like looking at a stranger. Being married to your mother doesn't make me anything to you, boy. You remember that. Quote, I had run to my room that day, tears streaming down my face, not understanding why the man who lived in our house, who sat at our dinner table every night, who signed my permission slips for school, refused to be my father. Later that evening, when I was supposed to be asleep, I heard my parents arguing in hushed tones in the living room. He's just a child, Ron, my mother pleaded. He doesn't understand. Maybe it's time he did understand, Ron shot back. I never signed up for this, Marissa. I married you, not him. You knew about Landon when we got together. You said you could handle it. I said I could provide for him. I never said I'd pretend he was mine. Those words had carved themselves into my young heart like initials in a tree, permanent, scarring, growing more pronounced with time. Even at 7, I understood that I was tolerated, not loved, provided for, not wanted. The pattern continued throughout my childhood. Parent-teacher conferences where Ron sat silent while my mother talked to my teachers. Little League games where other dads cheered from the sidelines while Ron checked his watch, eager to leave. Award ceremonies where I'd scan the audience hopefully, only to see Ron's empty chair beside my mother's proud but apologetic smile. I learned to stop asking questions about my real father. Every time I brought it up, my mother would get that faraway look in her eyes and change the subject. The past is the past, baby, she'd say. We're your family now. But sitting there in my graduation clothes, diploma propped against my laptop, I finally understood the truth. I'd been too young and too hopeful to accept. I had never really had a family at all. I'd had people who shared a house with me, who fed and clothed me, who went through the motions of caring. But love, real unconditional love, that had always been just out of reach, dangling like a carrot I could never quite grasp. It was time to stop reaching for it. 3 days after graduation, I found myself staring at a DNA testing kit I'd ordered online at 2 a.m. The small white box sat on my kitchen counter like a loaded gun, promising answers I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. The return label was already filled out. I just needed the courage to spit in a tube and drop it in the mail. I'd been carrying the weight of yesterday's humiliation like a stone in my chest. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Ron's voice cutting through the celebration. You'll never be my son. The words had been meant to wound, but instead, they'd crystallized something I'd been avoiding for years. The need to finally know who I really was. The next morning, I drove across town to visit Dr. Evelyn Moore, my genetics professor and the closest thing I'd had to a mentor these past 4 years. Her office was tucked away in the corner of the biology building, walls lined with research journals and family photos of her grandchildren. Landon, she said, looking up from a stack of papers with genuine warmth, congratulations on graduation. I heard your speech was exceptional. Thank you, Dr. Moore. I settled into the familiar chair across from her desk. I wanted to talk to you about that research position you mentioned. The one working with genetic genealogy. Her eyebrows raised slightly. That's wonderful. I was hoping you'd consider it. The field is exploding right now. We're helping people trace their ancestry, find family members, solve decades-old mysteries. It's fascinating work. What kind of mysteries? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Oh, all sorts. Adoptees finding birth parents, families discovering branches they never knew existed, people learning their heritage isn't what they thought it was. She paused, studying my face. Sometimes the DNA tells stories that families have kept buried for generations. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. Have you ever taken one of those tests yourself? Several, actually. For research purposes, of course. But I'll admit there's something powerful about seeing your genetic makeup spelled out in black and white. It can be clarifying. That word hit me like a bell. Clarifying. That's exactly what I needed. Dr. Moore, can I ask you something personal? Of course. If someone had questions about their paternity, hypothetically speaking, Would a commercial DNA test be reliable enough to provide answers? Her expression softened, and I realized she understood exactly what I was really asking. Hypothetically speaking, she said gently, modern DNA testing is incredibly accurate for determining biological relationships. Paternity tests are over 99.9% reliable when done properly. I drove home with her words echoing in my mind. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the test kit open in front of me. The instructions were simple. Spit in the tube. Seal it. Mail it. 4 to 6 weeks for results that could change everything. My hands trembled as I picked up the collection tube. 22 years of wondering, of feeling like I didn't quite fit anywhere, of searching Ron's face for any hint of resemblance that never came. 22 years of my mother's evasive answers and uncomfortable silences whenever I asked about my biological father. I thought about that 7-year-old boy who just wanted someone to call him son. Then I thought about the man I'd become. Educated, capable, strong enough to handle whatever truth was waiting in those results. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I spit in the tube, sealed it tight, and walked to the mailbox before I could change my mind. 2 weeks into the agonizing wait for my DNA results, I found myself driving the 3 hours to Charlotte to see Jordy. Jordan Evans had been my best friend since middle school, the only person who truly knew what my home life had been like growing up. If anyone could help me make sense of what I was going through, it was him. I found him at Murphy's Diner on the outskirts of the city, the same chain where we used to meet during high school when I needed to escape the suffocating atmosphere at home. He was already sitting in our usual booth, nursing a cup of coffee and scrolling through his phone. When he looked up and saw me, his face broke into that familiar grin that had gotten us both into trouble more times than I could count. "Landon Reyes," he said, standing to pull me into a bear hug. "Graduated college boy, look at you all fancy." "Good to see you too, Jordy." I slid into the booth across from him, grateful for the normalcy of his presence. "How's the job?" "Can't complain. Construction pays the bills, and I get to work with my hands." Not all of us were destined for cap and gown ceremonies. He signaled the waitress for another coffee. "Speaking of which, I heard about what happened at graduation. Mom saw it on Facebook." My stomach dropped. "It's on Facebook?" "Someone posted a video. It's been taken down now, but..." He shook his head. "Man, I'm sorry. Ron's always been a piece of work, but that was low even for him." I stared down at my hands, feeling the familiar shame wash over me. You know what the worst part is? I still hoped. After all these years, some stupid part of me thought maybe graduation would be different. "Hey," Jordy's voice was firm, "look at me." I raised my eyes to meet his. "You remember when we were 14 and you won that state science fair, the one with the solar panel project?" I nodded. "That had been one of my prouder moments, until I brought the trophy home. You came to my house that night crying because Ron threw the trophy in the trash. Said it was taking up space on the kitchen counter." Jordy's jaw tightened. "I told you then what I'm telling you now. That man's opinion of you doesn't define your worth." "I know that, but nothing. You've been chasing approval from someone who was never going to give it. Ron made his choice about you a long time ago, and it had nothing to do with who you are as a person." The waitress brought my coffee, giving us a moment of silence. When she left, I leaned forward and lowered my voice. "I did something, Jordy. I took a DNA test." His eyebrows shot up. "No kidding? You finally decided to dig into the mystery?" "The results should come back in a few weeks. I'm terrified of what I might find out." "Or what you might not find out," he said gently. "Listen, whether that test tells you your dad is some random guy from your mom's past or the President of the United States, it doesn't change the fact that you're one of the strongest people I know. You survived Ron Whitmore. You put yourself through college. You graduated at the top of your class." He reached across the table and gripped my shoulder. "Whatever that test says, you're still the same person who stood up to bullies in 7th grade. You're still the guy who helped me pass algebra. You're still my brother, DNA or no DNA." For the first time in weeks, I felt something loosen in my chest. Maybe Jordy was right. Maybe the answers I was seeking weren't really about biology at all. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was eating cereal and scrolling through job postings. The subject line was simple and devastating. Your DNA results are ready. My spoon clattered into the bowl as one stared at my laptop screen. 4 weeks and 2 days of waiting, and now the moment was here. My finger hovered over the mouse, trembling slightly. Whatever was behind that link would either confirm what I'd always suspected or shatter what little sense of identity I had left. I clicked. The page loaded slowly, my internet connection seeming to mock the urgency of the moment. Finally, the results appeared in neat, clinical charts and percentages. I scrolled past the ethnicity breakdown. 48% Sub-Saharan African, 35% European, 12% Native American, 5% unassigned, until I found what I was really looking for. Closed DNA matches. The first entry made my breath catch in my throat. David Monroe, predicted relationship. Father, shared DNA, 49.7%. Confidence, 99.8%. Father, not stepfather, not possible father. Father? With shaking hands, I clicked on David Monroe's profile. The page that loaded showed a professional headshot of a distinguished black man with kind eyes and graying temples. His profile was sparse but public, author and professor of African American literature at Morehouse College, Atlanta, Georgia. I Googled his name immediately. David Monroe wasn't just any professor. He was a well-known author, winner of several literary awards. His most recent book, Voices from the New South, had been featured in the New York Times. He had a website, speaking engagements, a whole life that had been unfolding parallel to mine for 22 years, a life that included being my father. I scrolled through dozens of articles and interviews, searching his face for any resemblance. There, around the eyes, the shape of his smile in one photograph. Features I'd always wondered about, traits that had never made sense when I looked at Ron's pale, angular face, or even my mother's softer features. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Hope you're doing well, sweetheart. Call when you can. The irony wasn't lost on me. 22 years of deflection, of the past is the past, and here was the truth, spelled out in black and white on my laptop screen. She'd known. She'd always known. I spent the next 3 hours reading everything I could find about David Monroe. Born in Birmingham, Alabama. Attended University of Georgia in the early 2000s, which would have put him there around the time my mother would have been in college. He wrote beautifully about family, identity, and the complex bonds that tie people together. In one interview from last year, the journalist asked him if he had children. His response hit me like a physical blow. Not yet. I've always hoped that someday I'd be blessed with a family of my own. He didn't know. This man, who was genetically, undeniably my father, had no idea I existed. My mother hadn't just hidden the truth from me. She'd hidden me from him entirely. I closed the laptop and sat in the silence of my apartment, processing the earthquake that had just shifted the foundation of my life. Ron wasn't my father. He never had been. And somewhere in Atlanta, just a few hours away, was the man who actually was, a man who might actually want a son. For the first time in weeks, I felt something that wasn't pain or confusion. I felt hope. I drove to Asheville that Friday, my laptop bag containing the printed DNA results, sitting like a bomb in my passenger seat. The 3-hour drive gave me plenty of time to rehearse what I would say, but as I pulled into the familiar driveway of my childhood home, all my carefully planned words evaporated. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the blue paint faded, and the front porch sagging slightly under the weight of too many Carolina summers. Ron's truck wasn't in the driveway. He'd be at work at the hardware store until 6. Perfect timing. My mother answered the door wearing her old gardening clothes, dirt smudged on her cheek. Her face lit up when she saw me, then immediately clouded with concern. "Landon, what are you doing here? Is everything okay?" "We need to talk, Mom." Something in my voice must have warned her. Her hand tightened on the doorframe. and I saw her glance nervously toward the neighbors' houses, as if checking who might be watching. "Of course, baby. Come in." The living room was exactly as I'd left it. Same beige couch, same family photos on the mantel, photos that suddenly felt like lies. I sat down across from her, pulling out the laptop and the printed results. "I took a DNA test," I said without preamble. All the color drained from her face. "Landon." "David Monroe." I watched her flinch as if I'd slapped her. "That name mean anything to you, Mom?" She was quiet for a long moment, her hands twisting in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "How did you find out?" "So you admit it. He's my father." Tears started sliding down her cheeks. "Baby, it's complicated. You don't understand." "Then explain it to me." The words exploded out of me, 22 years of frustration finally finding their voice. "Explain to me why you let me spend my entire childhood thinking there was something wrong with me. Explain why you married a man who treats me like garbage when my real father is out there somewhere." I was 17, Landon, 17 and pregnant and terrified. "So you lied to everyone? To me? To David?" Her sob caught in her throat. "David was he was an intern at the literary magazine where I worked that summer. He was brilliant and kind and headed to graduate school. He had his whole life ahead of him. And what about my life? What about his right to know he had a son?" She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "You think I didn't want to tell him? You think this was easy for me?" "I think you took the easy way out. You found Ron, who was willing to marry you and give the baby a name, and you convinced yourself that was enough. Ron offered stability, security, a home. Ron offered tolerance, Mom, not love, never love." I stood up too, my voice rising. "Do you have any idea what it's been like, growing up knowing I was unwanted? Being told not to call the only father figure I had Dad? Watching him throw away my trophies because they reminded him I existed?" She turned back to me, mascara streaked down her face. I thought if you had a stable home, 2 parents. You gave me one parent who resented me, and another who was too scared to tell the truth. You gave me 22 years of wondering why I wasn't good enough. "You were always good enough," she cried. "You were perfect. You are perfect." "Then why didn't you fight for me? Why didn't you tell David? Why didn't you stand up to Ron when he treated me like I was nothing?" The question hung between us like a chasm. She sank back onto the couch, looking older than I'd ever seen her. "Because I was a coward," she whispered. "Because I was 17 and scared, and I convinced myself that keeping quiet was protecting everyone. But all I did was hurt the 2 people I should have protected most." "2 people?" She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "You and David. He deserved to know about you, Landon. He would have wanted to know." For the first time since I'd walked in, I felt my anger soften slightly. "Do you really think so?" She nodded. He was a good man, kind. The type of person who would have dropped everything to be a father if he'd known. Something in her voice caught my attention. "Mom, do you still have his contact information?" My mother disappeared upstairs without a word, leaving me alone with the weight of our conversation. I could hear her moving around in her bedroom, drawers opening and closing. When she came back down, she was holding a yellowed envelope, the edges worn soft from handling. "I wrote this when you were 6 months old," she said, sitting beside me on the couch. "I must have rewritten it a dozen times." Quote. The envelope was addressed to David Monroe at his old university address. The return address was our old apartment across town, the one we'd lived in before Ron. "You never sent it." I sealed it, put a stamp on it, drove to the post office 3 times. Her voice was thick with regret, but I couldn't do it. I kept thinking about Ron, about the life we were building. I convinced myself it was better this way. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. The letter was written in my mother's careful handwriting, the ink faded but still legible. "David, I hope this letter finds you well. I've started writing this so many times, but I need you to know something important. We have a son. His name is Landon, and he's beautiful and perfect and has your eyes. I'm not asking for anything. I just thought you should know he exists. He deserves to know who his father is, and you deserve to know you have a son who will grow up wondering about you. I'm sorry I waited so long to tell you. I was scared, but that's no excuse. If you want to meet him, I understand. If you don't, I understand that too. But please know that he's loved, and he's going to be something special. Love, Marissa. I read it twice, my throat tight with emotion. This letter held 22 years of what might have been. I kept it, she whispered. All these years, I kept it. That night, I sat in my old bedroom with my laptop, staring at a blank email. David's website had a contact form. All I had to do was fill it out. Finally, I typed, Mr. Monroe, my name is Landon Reyes. I believe you knew my mother, Marissa, about 23 years ago. I have reason to believe you're my biological father. I would very much like to speak with you if you're willing. Respectfully, Landon. I hit send before I could change my mind. David's reply came just 18 hours later. Landon, I would very much like to meet you. Are you free this Saturday? There's a quiet cafe called Amelie's on Peachtree Street. I'll be there at 2 p.m. wearing a blue sweater. I've been waiting my whole life for this conversation without knowing it. My hands shook as I read those words. I've been waiting my whole life for this conversation without knowing it. Here was a man who wanted to meet his son. Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, typical Atlanta spring weather. I found Amelie's easily enough, a cozy place with mismatched furniture and the smell of fresh coffee hanging in the air. I spotted him immediately, sitting by the window in that blue sweater, reading a worn paperback. He looked up when I approached, and for a moment we just stared at each other. Landon, he said, standing slowly. His voice was warm, cultured, with the slightest trace of a southern accent. Mr. Monroe, David, the words stuck in my throat. Please, sit. He gestured to the chair across from him. I ordered you a coffee. I hope that's okay. We sat in awkward silence for a moment, two strangers connected by blood and separated by 22 years of missed moments. You look like her, he said finally, like Marissa. But you have my hands. He held up his own, long-fingered and graceful, and my stubborn chin. I touched my face self-consciously. She never told you? Not a word. His expression grew sad. I would have come, Landon. If I'd known, I would have dropped everything and come. She was scared, 17 and scared. And I was 21 and stupid enough to let a brilliant, beautiful woman slip away without fighting for her. He leaned forward. Tell me about yourself. Everything. I want to know who my son became. For the next 3 hours, I told him everything. About my childhood with Ron, about excelling in school, about feeling like I never belonged anywhere. He listened with an intensity that was almost overwhelming, asking questions, laughing at my stories, his eyes growing dark when I described Ron's coldness. I'm sorry, he said when I finished. I'm so sorry you went through that alone. I'm not alone anymore, am I? His smile could have powered the entire city. No, son, you're not alone anymore. The word hit me like a lightning bolt. Son, not boy or Landon or you, son. I know this is complicated, David continued. I know we can't make up for lost time overnight, but if you're willing, I'd like to try. I'd like to be your father, if you'll let me. I had to wipe my eyes with my napkin. I'd like that too. When we finally left the cafe, he pulled me into a hug, the first real father's embrace I'd ever received. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to truly belong. 2 weeks after meeting David, I found myself standing outside Whitmore Hardware in downtown Asheville. Through the dusty window, I could see Ron behind the counter, helping an elderly customer with paint samples. He looked older than I remembered, his hair grayer, his shoulders more stooped. I wasn't here for revenge. I wasn't even here for an apology, though God knew I deserved one. I was here for closure, to finally speak my truth from a position of strength rather than desperate hope. The bell chimed as I entered. Ron looked up, and I saw surprise flicker across his face before it hardened into that familiar mask of indifference. Landon, what do you want? To talk. 5 minutes. He glanced around the empty store, then nodded toward the back office. Make it quick. The office was cramped and cluttered, smelling of sawdust and old coffee. Ron settled behind his desk like it was a fortress. I remained standing. "I know the truth, Ron." "What truth?" "About my father. My real father." I watched his face carefully. "His name is David Monroe." For just a moment, Ron's carefully constructed facade cracked. Something flickered in his eyes. Not surprise, but resignation, as if he'd been waiting for this conversation for 20 years. "So," he said finally, "what do you want? A medal?" "I want to understand. You spent 20 years treating me like I was beneath you, and it turns out you were right. I'm not your son. But why take it out on a child? What did I ever do to deserve that?" Ron was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the desk. When he spoke, his voice was tired. "You existed," he said simply. "Every time I looked at you, I saw her shame, her mistake, her past. I wasn't her mistake. I was her son. You were proof that she'd been with someone else, someone better than me." The words came out bitter and broken. "You think I didn't know? College boy. Probably. Smart. Like you. Everything I wasn't." For the first time in my life, I saw Ron clearly, not as the monster I'd made him in my mind, but as a small, insecure man who'd let his inadequacies poison a child's life. "You could have chosen differently," I said quietly. "You could have chosen to love me anyway." "Maybe, but I didn't." I nodded, feeling strangely calm. "No, you didn't. And that's something you'll have to live with." I turned to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Ron, David is everything you thought he was. Brilliant, successful, kind. And you know what the difference is between you and him?" Ron looked up. "He wants to be my father." I walked out of Whitmore Hardware and didn't look back. I was done seeking validation from someone who had never deserved the title of father in the first place. 6 months later, I stood at the podium of the community center in downtown Atlanta, looking out at a room filled with teenagers who reminded me of myself at their age. Lost kids, foster kids, kids with absent fathers, and complicated families. Kids who needed to hear that their worth wasn't determined by the people who failed to love them. "My name is Landon Reyes," I began, "and for 22 years I believed I wasn't good enough to be loved." The room was silent, every face turned toward me with the kind of attention that comes from recognition. These kids knew what it felt like to be unwanted. I spent my childhood chasing approval from a man who told me I'd never be his son. I let his rejection define me, shape me, convince me that I was somehow broken. I paused, finding David's face in the crowd. He was sitting in the third row, his eyes bright with pride. But I was wrong about something important. The problem was never me. I told them about the DNA test, about finding David, about learning that love, real love, isn't something you have to earn. It's something that's freely given by the right people. "Today, we're launching the Chosen Family Foundation," I continued, "a mentorship program for young people who, like me, are searching for where they belong. Because family isn't just about DNA or marriage certificates or who raised you. Family is about who chooses to show up for you, who believes in you, who calls you their own." The applause was thunderous. As I stepped down from the podium, David was the first to reach me. He pulled me into that familiar embrace that still felt like coming home. "I'm proud of you, son," he whispered in my ear. In the crowd, I spotted my mother. She'd driven down from Asheville for the event, her eyes red with tears but her face glowing with something I'd rarely seen there, pride without qualification or condition. We'd been working on rebuilding our relationship, slowly, carefully. It would never be simple, but it was real. Jordy appeared at my elbow, grinning widely. "Look at you, changing the world and stuff." "We're changing it," I corrected him, "together." As the evening wound down and people began to leave, I found myself standing with David and Jordy outside the community center. The Atlanta skyline glittered before us, full of possibility. "You know what I realized?" I said, looking up at the stars barely visible beyond the city lights. "What's that?" David asked. "Ron was right about one thing. I'll never be his son." I smiled. feeling the weight of those words shift from pain to freedom. But I'm yours, and that makes all the difference. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly where I belonged. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.